Raise it.
I like do. Do.
This is about as close as to a guitar as I'll make.
Several weeks back, I shared with you guys that my sister was moving into a new, smaller place and needed some furniture. I got to build her one of my favorite projects of the year, my waterfall edge plywood nightstands. And then next, it was time to tackle the most important thing, the bed. I've had this design cooking in my brain for a while, and I really wanted to incorporate steel cables somehow. Like most of you, I love creating things that are going to be used and be helpful, and getting to help my sister at the same time made this project extra special. This video is sponsored by my friends at SawStop and the Home Depot. I was on a bit of a budget for this build, so I decided to use dimensional framing lumber, the kind that you can find off the shelf from Home Depot. If you've ever bought 4x4 posts or 2x4s, you know it's not always the prettiest wood. To make this Douglas fir look a little bit better, I decided to rip down the sides and to plane it a couple of times to give me some nice smooth flat edges. The 4x4 posts are pretty heavy, so I started by cutting them down to some manageable sizes. I then got to bust out my new baby. I think I've wanted a SawStop saw since the first time I built a piece of furniture. I've been playing around with the new JobSite Pro and I'm totally in love. It's super versatile and easy for me to move around, but most importantly, it has the same skin detection technology that all SawStop saws have. If you're not familiar with the SawStop brand, you need to go Google the SawStop hot dog trick right now. You'll be impressed and you'll want one for yourself, I promise. We started by ripping a 1/4 inch off of each side of the 4x4 posts. The blade of my saw didn't raise quite high enough to cut one side of the 4x4 post in a single pass, so I had to make 2 cuts for the first 2 sides of each post. When all my posts were just over 3 inches square and had nice square corners, I moved over to my thickness planer. This helped remove any saw marks and make the thickness of the posts more consistent. If you don't have these tools, don't worry. The ripping and the planing are totally optional. You could still build this project with off-the-shelf lumber. With the posts milled up, the next step was to cut them to final length. I then marked the locations where I needed to cut my joinery. I wanted my headboard to be really strong, so I decided a joint like a half lamp would be much stronger than a traditional butt joint, where one board just dead ends into the other. I found the center of the upper and lower headboard stretchers, and then I aligned the center leg on top of them. I then used a pencil to mark the exact width of the leg. I set the blade height on my table saw to exactly 1/2 of the thickness of the 4x4 posts. I then clamped the first stretcher to my miter gauge. The miter gauge helped me make perfectly 90-degree cuts through the middle of my board. I made my first cut just inside the line that I had made to indicate where the center leg would intersect. I moved the stretcher over and then made a second cut just inside the opposite pencil mark. With the boundaries of my joint cleanly cut, all that I needed to do now is make multiple passes cleaning out the waste in the middle. If this is your first pneumatic attic video, I just want to say thank you. I'm glad you're here. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and tag the little bell so you never miss one of my new projects. After making multiple consecutive cuts, I then got to do the best part of a half lap joint, breaking out the middle. It is so satisfying. Once the notches were cut in the stretchers, it was time to turn my attention back to the center leg. You don't have to worry about all the exact measurements. I'm sharing the free building plans on my website. You can find a link in the description box below. Once all the joinery was cut for my headboard, it was time to start drilling holes to accept the cable railing. I marked the location of the holes on one of the vertical legs and then used that leg to mark the locations on the other two legs. This way I could be sure that the railing would be perfectly straight and at a 90 degree to each leg. Are you liking what you see so far? Make sure to click that thumbs up button. At this point I did a dry assembly with all the leg components just to make sure that everything was going to fit and look right. I started to build the headboard from the middle and worked my way out. I applied glue to the joint area of the first stretcher and the middle leg. I then pressed the pieces together. The joint needed a little bit of persuasion with a block, but it was a nice tight fit. Before moving on, I checked all four corners of the joint just to make sure that it was sitting square. Once that was good, I moved on to attaching the top stretcher. More glue and checking for square. For attaching the outer legs of the headboard, I decided to use a lot more simple technique. I countersunk and pre-drilled through the outside of the legs and into each stretcher. I then added some glue, moved the legs in place, and drove 1/4 inch by 5 inch lag screws. To cover up the heads of the lag screws, I inserted 1/2 inch dowels into the countersunk holes, and then trimmed them flush. Now at this point, me and my belt sander became real good friends. I sanded every joint flat, and I made sure that the headboard looked like one smooth, continuous piece. Although I was saving a lot of money from using framing lumber, I had to deal with a lot of pain in the butt issues too. The particular boards and posts that I used had lots of defects and knot holes, so that meant lots of wood filler. While the wood filler cured, I started working on the rest of the bed. To match the width of the posts that I had ripped down, I also ripped down some 2x4s to only 3 inches wide. I then cut the 2x4s into lengths that would become the side rails and the front rail of the footboard. I cut 2 10-inch legs from some of the scrap 4x4 posts, which I attached to a 56-inch long 2x4 to make a footboard. I connected the pieces together the same way I added the outer legs to the headboard, pre-drilling and then using glue and lag screws to hold everything together. I covered the head of the lag screws with more dowels and then filled any gaps and defects with more wood filler. I started sanding and doing my best to make this inexpensive framing lumber look a little bit better, and in the meantime my husband started building the mattress support frame. Actually, my husband Bryce is making fun of me while I'm recording this voiceover, so I'm going to let him take over this part.
Using the length of the rails, I determined what the spacing would be on the slats. The next thing I did was cut my rails to length. Then with the rails laid side by side, I used the determined spacing to lay out for my slats. The next thing to do was to use that layout to pre-drill. I moved over to the miter saw to cut a bunch of the slats at one time. Alicia keeps calling it gang cutting. With the slats all cut, I laid them out between the rails. Using some clamps to hold them in place, I was able to pre-drill through the holes that I had already done in the rails into the slats. Finally, I screwed it all together with 3-inch screws.
Okay, Alicia again. I took the microphone back so I can explain what we did next. We needed to attach the decorative outer rails to the mattress support frame. I planned on putting a piece of 1/4-inch plywood on top of the mattress support frame, so I used it as kind of a space indicator to determine where my decorative rails would attach on the sides. We then clamped the decorative rails to the frame, pre-drilled, and attached them using glue and 2.5-inch screws. With the decorative outer rails in place, I moved the two 29-inch wide plywood panels on top of the frame. We used pencils, squares, and a straight edge to mark the length of the frame. We then stacked the plywood sheets up and moved them out of the way so I could cut them to length using my circular saw. The design that I made is basically a platform bed, which means you don't need a box spring for the mattress. However, mattresses need to be able to breathe and circulate air well, so we made sure to drill some holes into the plywood. We then moved the mattress support frame onto some spacer blocks and moved the footboard into position. To be able to make this bed easy to assemble and reassemble, I decided to use metal bed rail hardware. The kit wasn't very expensive. I'll leave a link in the description box for the exact ones we used. I found them on Amazon. What's nice is the next time my sister moves, it will be easy to take the bed apart, removing the headboard and the footboard separately from the frame. This is a lot better option than using something like screws, which will strip the holes out over time. We used the same brackets to attach the headboard to the top of the mattress support frame. If you're ever building a queen mattress or larger, I think it's a great idea to add a couple of support legs to the middle. We drilled 2 1/4-inch holes towards the top of a couple of pieces of scrap 2x3. We then clamped the 2x3s to the center of 2 of the slats in the support frame. We then drilled through the support leg and through the slat. As you can probably see, we discovered this stage would have probably been easier before we assembled the frame. It would have been really impossible if I didn't have this right angle attachment for a drill. We inserted a 1/4-inch by 4-inch bolt through the top hole and secured it in place with a locking nut. The other hole would receive another 1/4-inch by 4-inch bolt, but this one with a wing nut. To make sure the support legs don't get in the way when moving the frame, I wanted the leg to be able to swing out of the way. We drilled a 3rd hole towards the bottom of the leg and through the slat. When the frame's not in use, the support legs can be swung out of the way, the bolt reinserted and held together with the wing nut. At this point, the bed was fully assembled and it was time for finish. When I decided to build bedroom furniture for my sister, I told her that I would get to pick the design, but I let her pick the colors. I was originally really liking the color of the wood, but she decided she wanted white paint. Whenever I'm finishing raw wood with paint, especially white, I make sure I lay down a coat of shellac first. The shellac works as a primer and it seals any knots or stains and prevents tannin from seeping through and creating dark marks on the paint later. I then followed up with 3 coats of an acrylic semi-gloss white paint. Once the paint was fully dry, it was time to start attaching the cable railing hardware. To protect the holes in the center leg and to make them look a little bit more finished, I decided to tap in these stainless steel inserts. The inserts are basically sleeves that the cable will run through, and they were easily tapped into place with a hammer. I ordered my railing cable online, and when I opened it, I discovered that they sent me the wrong one. I originally ordered galvanized, but they sent me this black coated stuff. At first, I thought I was going to work with it, so I moved on to the next step.
Enter Patrick Swayze.
So what my husband's talking about, this thing is called a swaging tool. I'll give you a warning, it's kind of expensive, but we decided that we're going to do cable railing on our new home, and so the $100 investment was worth it for us. If you don't want to spend that kind of money, don't worry. There are other swageless hardware options. I started by doing a rough estimate to determine how much length I needed for each cable. I intentionally cut them a little long. To attach the railing to the wood posts, I purchased left and right lag screws that need to be swaged or crimped onto the ends of the cables. I started by swaging all the right thread lags onto the ends of each of the 5 cables. The crimper tool is hydraulically assisted, so you get a lot of pressure to crush the stainless steel tube around the cable. I swaged the lag in 2 places and got a really clean looking and secure connection. I then inserted the opposite end of the cable through the center leg of the headboard. We then began to attach the left thread lags to the opposite ends of the cable. This whole swaging process was actually really fun, and I want to try it on another project soon. We inserted the lags into opposite holes and started to twist the cable backwards. The beauty of having both right and left-handed threads is that we could twist the cable one direction without it untwisting the cable and making sure that the lags pulled tension evenly. My only complaint about the particular cable connectors that we used is that they didn't really have a great way to twist them. They were very sleek and minimal, but it made it difficult to get a wrench or pliers on them. We eventually discovered that the only way to twist the lags really was to use a pair of vice grip pliers. Once all the cables were tightened as closely to the same tension as we could, it was time to assemble the bed. The next day we took everything over to my sister's and started to put the bed together. We began with the headboard and then moved in the mattress support frame. Looking back at it, I'm pretty sure we installed the metal bed rail brackets backwards, but they seem to work okay with a wrench and tightening everything down. We made sure to have the center support legs flipped down, and then we moved the footboard into place. Next, we brought in the plywood toppers. Now, if you plan on using a box spring with this bed, you can skip the plywood altogether. Make sure you measure the height of your box spring and mattress together, because that may make you want to adjust the height of your bed legs. We attached the plywood in place using 1 1/4 inch screws driven down into the frame. We moved the mattress into place, and it was a bed. I want all the pieces I build to be just as functional as they are beautiful. So admittedly, I had a little bit of concern about the tension of the cables and whether or not this design would work well for somebody who wants to sit up in bed. I'm happy to report that the railing works perfectly and is more than supportive for anybody who wants to sit up and lean against the headboard. You guys have been asking when I was going to get my next video out, so thank you for being patient. I'm glad my sister has something beautiful and sturdy to sleep on in her new place. I absolutely love how this bed turned out. It really exceeded my expectations. I just don't know why it took me so long to make. If you like practical DIY furniture, make sure you check out this video. And maybe this one as well. I want to know what kind of projects you guys want me to tackle this upcoming year, so make sure you leave a comment down below. As always, thanks for watching, guys.